Joy's going to come turn up my microphone for me here. Can you hear me better now? Better now? Oh, there we go. That's way better. Okay. We are going to get started because it is a beautiful night out, and we're not going to get this many beautiful nights still yet this year. So we will start on time and we will end on time. If we don't get to your question before 7:30, some of us will stay later and get to your question, but I want to let folks go at 7:30. So my name is Maggie Pallone. I'm with Public Sector Consultants, and I'm going to help lead this meeting tonight. But before we get started, I want to turn it over to Rich and then Josh just to do a couple opening remarks and take us through our safety detail board before we go any further tonight.
All right, good evening. I'm Rich Castle. I'm the Community Affairs Manager for Consumers Energy for Northeast Michigan. So if you weren't here last year, I cover 8 counties here in the region based out of our Tawas Service Center. So I want to welcome you tonight. So at Consumers Energy, we take safety very seriously, and so you guys have probably seen this if you've been to any of our events. So if anything happens, this is to direct you on what to do and how we're going to facilitate an emergency if that were to happen. So we're located at the Eagle Ridge Golf Course here at 3501 State Road in Glennie, or M65. Exit and assembly. So if there isn't an emergency, we're actually going to exit out this door here, and we're going to walk out and try to get past the green out here, get in an opening far enough away from the building in case there's a fire or something going on. Incident commander. I am the incident commander. My cell number, if you need to get it, is 231-735-3619. 911, Anna Lee is going to call 911. She's over there by the table. Emergency responder runner is Maggie. CPR first aid is Josh Brigette. The AED, the first responders will provide that. Fire extinguisher, Mary Ann Walters. You know where the fire extinguisher is? All right. And then hazards. So if there is an emergency, let's just try to file out of here as quickly as possible, but as organized as possible. But just be aware that we've got a lot of chairs, tables, we have a cord up here, and then also there's just a lot of us in here tonight. So let's be aware of that. And then unfortunately, you know, in today's world, we got to be aware of this, but if there is an active shooter, you have to decide how you're going to approach this. So you can run, you can hide, make sure you silent your phone. You know, why give out your position, right? And then fight or tell. So those are your options. So I hate to do that, but that's the reality of today. All right, I'm going to pass this over to Josh Brigette, but I do thank you everyone for being here tonight.
All right, thank you, Rich. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here. One other thing, just want to notice, we mentioned this door. This side of the room is probably a little safer to go out the doors out here, so just make sure you understand what door is closest to you so we can get out safely. Josh Brigette, Executive Director of Community Engagement for Consumers Energy. Glad all of you can come and join us again here tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping items. There's some restrooms right up here behind Maggie. There's also restrooms outside if you go for the restaurant if you need that. To give you a lay of the land for today, we're going to give you about a 50-minute presentation, give you some updates of what we've been doing for the past year, and then we'll have about 40 minutes available for questions. As Maggie said, we'll stick around. We're going to shut the meeting down on time, but we'll stick around as late as you need us to. If you have questions that weren't answered in the meeting, we'll stick around and talk to you. Also, all the slides you see here tonight are going to be put online tomorrow or the next day as soon as our web team can get them up. So I don't want you to feel like you have to take a bunch of pictures or take a bunch of notes. Anything that we have in the studies that we referenced tonight, all that will be posted online on our Hydro Future website. So just this for all of you. I have a couple colleagues with me. You've already met Rich. Mary Ann Walter is going to join me for the Q&A later for any questions that you have. But looking forward to having the conversation tonight. So I will turn it over to Maggie. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Just one last thing. We noted that people are a hazard. It always makes me nervous when we say that. But just to make sure that you're not even more of a hazard to my health up here tonight, we are asking that no alcohol in this room tonight. If you want to have a drink, please feel free to go back to the bar. But for the next hour and a half, we'll try to make sure that I don't have drinks thrown at me as we do this meeting tonight. No, you guys all look like a very, very friendly crowd. So what are we going to do tonight? I want to give you just to update you on some information that we've collected and gathered over the last year about the long-term hydro strategy. We want to continue to engage you in the conversation, allow for you to ask questions of us. And then I want to talk a little bit, or actually Josh is going to handle this part tonight, talk a little bit about the future and how we're thinking about structuring the future, right? We love coming up here. This weather is beautiful, but there's probably a better way for us to continue to engage the community and have a meaningful dialogue. And so we're going to talk about what we've thought about that looking like in the future. So you're hearing from consumers of energy more often and having more community members engaged in the conversation. Like Josh said, our presentation is like 45 minutes, and then we'll allow for as many questions as possible afterwards. When we get to the question and answer period, either Anna or Joy will have the other microphone, and we'll just ask that you raise your hand, and they'll kind of zigzag across the room. We'll try to get to you, so please just have a little bit of patience. We found that when people are just yelling at the question, while we might be able to hear you, other people in the room can't hear your question, and so it's just easier if we have a mic out in the audience and a mic up here with us. Okay, so just a show of hands, how many of you were here last year for the meeting? This was the one meeting I didn't make it to last year. Great, so many of you have seen some of these first few slides, but just wanted to share with them, for those of you that weren't here or who haven't been quite as involved in the conversation thus far, why we're here tonight. So Consumers Energy has 13 dams across lower Michigan, and 11 of those 13 have their FERC operating license expire over the next 11 years. Those operating licenses are what allows them to operate hydropower. And so as they continue to think about what to do in the next licensing period, we've started to have these conversations. So we started up last year to collect some information from you, and then continuing these conversations this year, all with the emphasis on how can Consumers Energy continue to deliver cost-effective, safe, reliable, and affordable clean energy for all of Michigan. So we are on the Saubel River. You are our first meeting on the Saubel, but we have already had some meetings. So we have had meetings already on the Muskegon and the Grand and the Kalamazoo, but we will continue to have these meetings through November 15th. And so you can see here where they have them, 6 hydro facilities on the Saubel, 2 on the Manistee, 3 on the Muskegon, 1 on the Grand, and then 1 down on the Kalamazoo River in Allegan. This is a lot of information, but I think I'll walk you through what this is saying, but I think it's kind of helpful to see the overall fleet. So this is Consumers' 13 hydro dams, and if you look here, you can see that they have the capacity, that's this line right here, to generate around 131 megawatts of power. Right now, they're averaging around 50, right? So you can look at Alcona. It'd be really helpful if one of these days we actually got around to alphabetizing this. You can see Alcona is right there in the middle. It has the capacity to generate 8 megawatts. It's generating, though, somewhere around 3 1/4. And that's really, for a lot of these, when we think about, like, you're like, okay, Maggie, well, if it can generate 131, why aren't we generating 131, right? Like, why are we generating at 50 megawatts instead of what they're capable of generating? And a lot of that is just because of environmental regulations, right? That, like, how these dams used to operate and how most hydro dams, when they are able to generate this kind of megawatt power, operate, right? They use the pond every day, they fill it up, and then usually at night they drop it and push as much water as fast as they can through the generators, and that pushes power out, right? And so when you think about how that impacts a river system, it's not the greatest, right? Not only does it have pretty significant impact on the ecology of the river, but also on water temperatures and other things. And so since the 90s, Consumers has had to operate most of their hydro facilities and run of the river, right? It has to maintain that river flow pretty much and pass as much water through at all times. And so that's really why you see that drop in capacity and how much they're generating today. You can also see that these dams, most of them are approaching or have already hit 100 years old, right? These facilities are not new. In fact, the newest one in the fleet is Calkins Bridge at 1935, right? So 90 years old almost. You can see Alcona here was built in 1924. So next year it will have a pretty big birthday celebration. I'm assuming, Rich, right? That's getting planned for something, some centennial? Yeah. So 100 years old for Alcona, and it has an operating license. It's one of the 11 that has an operating license that expires in 2034. All of that, 50 megawatts of power, equals about 1% of consumers' total generation. So you can see up here that gas is the largest portion of their portfolio at about 63%, followed right now by coal, but you know that Consumers Energy announced that they'll be retiring their last coal plants here in the next couple of years. Most of that coal generation will, in the short term, be made up by natural gas, and then eventually, obviously, more solar and wind energy will come online. So hydro's over here, that small little line at 1%. Okay, so many of you raised your hand, so you were part of why I'm thanking you for your participation last year. But you can see that we had 22 community meetings last year. We had one at every dam location and then had meetings with local officials. In those 22 meetings, we talked to over 1,700 people. So we heard from a lot of people in those meetings and with communities. We also had 570 comments on our website. So over the last year, if anybody went to consumersenergy.com/hydrofuture, they were able to submit comments or email us about dams. And I'll get into what some of those comments were here in a little bit. We also sent a survey to property owners who own property adjacent to any consumer's parcel. And so we sent out around 2,300 surveys and received back almost 1,400. So like a 60% return rate on those surveys, which is pretty phenomenal. And clearly, right, people were very anxious, rightfully so, to share and wanting to get their feedback back to PSC. And then we also have had we had last year 3 stakeholder meetings with like statewide organizations, so with DNR or some fisheries groups to talk about what we were doing on these river systems. So what did we hear and what did we learn? I think the very first thing, and probably the most important thing that we learned, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, but you know, we came into these communities ready to have a conversation about the hydro future, and communities just weren't ready, right? These had been in your communities for, in this case, 100 years. And so the thought to all of a sudden have this community asset pulled out from you, communities weren't ready to have a dialogue that was gonna be productive. Right, we needed to give you a lot more data and a lot more information before we could even come back and have that conversation. We also heard that while communities weren't ready for the conversation, partly because they trusted that consumers was keeping their community safe, right? That the dams were going to be operated in a manner that folks felt was going to protect both upstream and downstream systems, and that the dams generally were safe, and they trusted the company to keep them safe, right? Like as we had some of these conversations, and we talked about different scenarios, a lot of times we heard, like, we really want only consumers. If somebody's going to be operating a dam in our community, we sure as heck want it to be consumers. Like, we trust that they'll make the investments necessary to keep us safe. But on the flip side, while you might have trusted consumers to keep the dam in good working order, you didn't really trust that, not you, everybody that provided us feedback, or maybe you too, didn't really trust that at the end of the day, even though consumers was having these meetings and talking to your communities, you didn't feel like consumers was ultimately going to make a decision that was based on your community needs and preferences, right? That like, thanks consumers, thanks for listening, but we don't think at the end of the day, you're going to do what we ask you to do. Preferences based on what people wanted out of their dams and what their preference for keeping or removing the dams was most certainly dependent on your relationship and your proximity to the dam. So a little bit different in this case because, right, consumers and the federal government owns most of the land directly surrounding the dam. But as we were in communities like down in Allegan, right, where there's like 800 houses on the impoundment, they cared pretty deeply, right, about, not that you guys didn't care deeply, but their preference and their desire to keep the dam was clearly exhibited in some of the data I'm going to show you. And then we also saw in some of the data that I'll share with you later that if you looked at expanded out to the statewide view, that people were much more willing to think about taking out the dams. Makes sense, right? Like if you care deeply, if your economics and your way of life is dependent on something, you're going to care pretty deeply about keeping it. And then I will say that, well, people said like, hey, it's great that Consumers has this hydro facility and we love that green power is being generated in our community. Ultimately, what we really care about is keeping our impoundment. That like, we don't actually care if Consumers is generating power, but we sure as heck care that they keep some sort of structure there to keep our impoundment. And we heard that across all of the communities at varying levels, but that was generally the sense that we got. So I'm gonna dive into some of the feedback in more detail that we got, and then I'm gonna talk about what we did with all that feedback. So this is a summary of who we heard from. And you can see here, we heard from about 1,400 people, as I said, and a majority of the people that we heard from was from Calkins Bridge. And again, that makes sense because they have just the most amount of property owners surrounding the dam. Alcona, a small piece of it, but that, again, remember this is property owners who own property adjacent to the dam. So in this case, that's why that number is so low. There's just not a lot of property owners adjacent to this facility. So the first question we asked was, what's your preference regarding the future of the dam? And you can see here, overwhelmingly, right? 86% of people said, we want you to relicense the dam and continue to operate as is. Just 1% of property owners said that their preference would be to remove the dam and return the river back. So then we said, okay, if Consumers is going about this decision of relicensing or removal, what should be the factors that they consider most important as they make this decision? And you can see overwhelmingly people said that the impact to my community is the most important thing. So the dark blue is strongly agree. You can see that people generally said that the cost to maintain and operate the facility was not very important to them in terms of making that decision in the future. Cost to Consumers Energy. We also asked, and this slide right here shows actually the answers to 2 different questions. So we said, do you have concerns about how the dam operates today? And that's the dark blue. And then we said, do you have concerns if the dam were to be removed? And you can see we gave people a whole list of questions that they could respond to in terms of, is this a concern to you today? So impact to my property, right? A whole bunch of folks said I would have a pretty significant concern on the impact to my property if the dam were to be removed. They also were concerned about it if the dam were to remain, but not in high numbers. You can see the other big area here is impact on recreational opportunities, that people were really concerned about if the dam were to be removed, the impact on their ability to recreate the same way they do today. And so finally we said, okay, if you want to keep your dam, and we went through all of this data about how costly it is to maintain your dam, are you willing to pay some sort of additional fee to maintain your hydro facility in your community? And a majority of folks said, yeah, I'm willing to pay something, a nominal fee. A smaller portion said I'm willing to pay a larger fee to keep my dam. And just 22% said, you know, I think the dam should stay, but I'm not willing to pay anything to keep it. So I think really great data points for us to have as we continue these conversations, and Josh will talk a little bit about how this data was helpful over the last year, having some conversations with your community leaders. So this is where I think it just becomes a little bit more clear around preferences around dam removal or keeping the dam. So this was preferences on the website. So anybody could log onto the website and give us comments, right? Anybody across the state. And we just asked a couple identifying questions before they were able to give us their feedback. And one of them was around, do you have a preference? What dam were you writing us about? And then, do you have a preference regarding removal or keeping the dam? And over here on the left side, that's number of respondents. So this is not in percentage-wise. So you can see even Mile, where we got the most number of comments, it was just 100, right? So compared to some of the other comments where we were receiving 300 or 400 on any one site. But Alcona over there on the left, and that you can see just based on website respondents, more folks said they thought the dam should be removed than kept. And we got about 50 respondents for Alcona on the website. So overall though, we heard from 270 unique comments across all channels of input. So website, emails to us, phone calls to us, we tracked everything. And then property owner surveys. And you can see here what the main concerns were from people in this community or people who commented on the dam in this community. Impact on your property values, right, and the property tax base. Some of the numbers I'm going to show you in a minute. I can see why you would be concerned about that. The presence of contaminated soil and what you were going to do with that should the dam be removed. The economic impact on the community, right, like your next couple slides will show, again, why I can see why you were so concerned about that. It's real, pretty significant money in this community because of this asset in the community. And then, obviously, the tourism at Alcona Park, right? Big, huge concern that people were worried about that the ability to recreate there and what it would look like in the future would be significantly shifted should consumers remove the dam. Okay, so we got all of this feedback, right? We heard from 1,700 people, another 1,400 on a survey, and 500 on a website. And we sat down with consumers at the end of all of the community meetings we had last year and said, okay, what should we do with all of this feedback? And how can we make sure that when we come back to the communities that we're coming back with some valuable information, right? We just don't want to come up here and stand in front of you again and not be able to answer some of the questions that you lobbed at us last year. So the very first thing that we started doing was my firm, PSC, along with Michigan State, have done 13 economic contribution studies to better quantify the economic contribution these assets have in the community. So we did one for every single dam location. And I'll go through some of the high-level survey results tonight. We looked at impact on taxes, impact on recreational spending, property values, all of those things we quantified for each dam location. Additionally, we continue to meet with local governments and lake associations to keep them updated and ask questions. Many of them provided us, actually I think all of them, provided us information for the studies. So they've been a partner over the last year in trying to gather data and give us feedback. Additionally, consumers, and Josh will give you an overview of this, has applied for some external funding to try to make the economics work on keeping these facilities. And then we heard again in these meetings last year, like Maggie or Joy, you guys throw out these numbers of $1 billion or 100 million or 500 million or 57 million, right? All of these numbers, and it's hard to understand what that means to an average ratepayer, right? Like for your community, it might not feel like a lot, but so we've asked consumers to quantify some of this data for us in terms of what it would look like on an average bill. So I'll share that data with you today. And then consumers announced, and we'll go into some more details on this in a minute, but a willingness to allow for potential buyers. And after every meeting last year, somebody would come up to us and be like, hey, you guys didn't mention selling. Is that not something you would consider? And it became apparent that while it was not something that they had considered then, that it was probably something they needed to think about or at least get some more data on. And so they have not put out the RFP yet. Josh will talk about this more. But they just announced it before we started these meetings, so we weren't standing halfway through in meeting number 7, and all of a sudden this announcement came out and we hadn't talked about it. So they've announced that an RFP will go out later this year. We'll talk more about what will be in that RFP here in a minute. We additionally heard a lot of feedback that the way that we let people know about these meetings last year wasn't the best, right? This is not an easy media market to get into, and so we've tried to do some things differently this year. And I've heard that there's more folks here this year than there was last year, so hopefully it worked. The first thing that we have done is really try to expand our engagement opportunities. We are doing 2 virtual statewide meetings, so if your neighbors or friends couldn't be here tonight, we'll have another virtual statewide meeting in November. And so all that information is on our website. We won't go into like Alcona specific data, but they'll at least be able to hear the rest of the slides. And we already had one in early September, late August. We also have sent out direct mailers, so we are reaching out to individual property owners, trying to encourage folks to come. Hopefully many of you in the room got one of those mailers. And then we are just really thinking about what data we share and what data to collect and how to share that. So again, hopefully today's meeting provides you more input and is more valuable to you than last year. That's our goal.
Where's it going to be?
I'm sorry?
Where's the meeting going to be?
What meeting?
November.
It's virtual, so it'll be online. Anybody across the state can log in and sign up. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic contribution analysis, but I just want to give you a little bit of an overview about what it is and what it isn't. So it is an economic contribution study is a snapshot in time about how an asset, in this case, the dams, are contributing to the local economy. It does not make any assumptions about if that asset were to be removed, right? So what it's telling us is how today the local economy is impacted because of having this asset here in your community. We will later do some economic impact studies, but what we heard last year was that folks really wanted us to quantify this data, right? You all sat in these meetings and told us how valuable it was, and so economic contribution study helps us understand that in real data and real numbers. It looks at employment, labor income, taxes, the impact on the regional GDP and also the statewide GDP, and then obviously like property taxes and things like that. So here in Alcona, for Alcona Dam, well, what we found was that annually the recreational and business assets surrounding the impoundment created by Alcona Dam contribute about $2 million to your regional GDP. Annually, $2 million. They also support 78 jobs, just in this community, annually. It also adds about $725,000 to local, state, and federal taxes through direct, indirect, and induced tax spending. That's the annual number, right? Just because of the recreational spending here in the community. Like we heard that when we were here last year, but to see that number, I actually double checked it because I was like, whoa, that is a lot of money. Yeah, so it's real dollars to your local economy because of this assets here in your community. We also did a property tax analysis for every dam here in Alcona. We couldn't actually look at how much property taxes were increased because all of the property directly surrounding Alcona Dam is either consumers or federal land. But we did look at how much they contribute in taxable value. You can see here $3 million in taxable value from those 19 properties. Right, so something that we need to think about because that's, again, a lot of tax dollars for just a few parcels of land. So this slide is busy, but what I want you to see here, and it just gives you a good overview of what it looks like across all of Consumers Energy dam by dam. So you can't add all of this up and get to a number. I'll share with you what those numbers are, but you can see here, just on the Asado River system, Foot, 229 jobs, right? 165 jobs contributing to the GDP, sometimes $6 million, $5 million, and adding some pretty significant money in taxes. When we look at these though across the whole state, here's what we see. $140 million annually added to the state's GDP because of these recreational assets in the communities. 13 communities, $140 million added to the state's GDP. Additionally, 1,400 jobs are directly created because these assets are in these small communities across northern Michigan. Those 1,400 jobs allow for another 600 jobs to be created. So, right, you think about because there's a campground here in your community, right? Then the local grocery store is able to add an additional employee, right? That's what we mean when we say additional jobs are created. So 2,000 jobs created because of these dams across the state. $20 million in local, county, and state taxes, tax revenues generated annually from that spending. So the $140 million generates about $20 million in taxes. It also increases property values. So this is not the total property value. This is increase to property values by $130 million around these dams. $130 million in increased property value. That $130 million in increased property value adds about $2.3 million to local property taxes. This is statewide data. This would be amazing for almost any industry, right? No industry would shy away from these numbers. It's real numbers. So what you guys told us, I hope you see quantified in this data. All of these reports, like Josh said, will be available on the website tomorrow or Wednesday, so you can dive really into the data and the background data if you so desire. So while we have worked to understand how much they contribute to the local economy, I also think it's important to understand how much it costs consumers to maintain these. And so if you were in the meetings last year, we talked a little bit about this, and I just think it's important to, again, revisit these numbers and really understand what this looks like when we say, that's great that it generates that much money for the local economy, but at what cost to ratepayers across the state? So just want to remind folks, right, I said this is 1% of consumers' generation. It's 9 times more expensive than any other source of generation at consumers. It's 15 times more expensive than any other source of generation if you take out coal. And it's not because it's like inherently more expensive to generate 1 megawatt of power at a hydro facility than it is at a coal plant or a natural gas plant. A lot of this cost, actually all of this cost, is in the capital expenses to maintain the actual facility in which generates that power. Right, so we're going to show some numbers here in a minute about that, but really it's the capital expenses that make it so much more expensive when we think about the cost to generate this power. So this is what it looks like across the fleet. If consumers were to go today and say, we're going to relicense all 13 of our hydro facilities, they would need to come up with about $1.4 billion to relicense all of them today, in today's dollars. If they were to decommission all of their facilities, right, there's a cost involved. It's not like we're just going to send out Maggie Palone LLC to just, with a wrecking ball to take these down, right? Like it's cost intensive and labor intensive to also remove them. But but 631 million. That delta is about $781 million more expensive to relicense the facilities than it is to decommission the facilities. If they were to do it all today, to make that decision today in today's dollars. For Alcona, it's about $57 million more expensive to relicense than it is to decommission. Okay, so Maggie, $57 million, like help me understand what that is or isn't, right? So over the next 60 years, if consumers were to relicense all of their facilities, it would cost customers on average around $360 a month for the next 60 years. And that's if your average bill is like $117. So you can do the math, right? If your bill is more than $117, it would cost you more than that. If your bill is less than $117, it would cost you less than that. That's for a residential household. If you look at a small business, about $13.80 a month for the next 60 years. And if you're a large business, that's about $1,000 a month more for the next 60 years. So some pretty significant numbers for customers to take on in order for consumers to maintain these systems without actually generating that much more power, right? Like we know that the cost is in capital and not in investment in new generation technology to push more power through these systems. So I'm going to ask Josh to come up here and talk a little bit about what you guys are doing to address some of these costs, so try not to pass it on to customers.
All right, so Maggie talked about we've been trying to get external funding. That is key for us. You just saw the numbers. You see how expensive it is for all of you and for the rest of our customers. So we have to find new revenue sources to be able to offset some of these costs. We're not going to put the entire burden on our customers. So I want to talk through what we've been doing, what we've already done. So I'll just start with local. We've been having meetings with local units of government and local leaders all across the state, every impacted community, and here in your community as well. I see some friendly faces in the room who we've been meeting with. But just understand, is there interest and is there capacity at the local level to contribute towards ongoing funds? The MPSC challenged us and said, if the bulk of the benefit stays at the local level, is there any contribution that could be there from the local level? We've had some really good dialogue. We've not committed to anything. We haven't even asked, quite frankly, for any level of commitment. But we've had great conversations, and I think your representatives have represented you all well. Just understand that there is an interest in finding a way to maintain some level of autonomy. At the state level, we've had successful conversations as well. There's some policymakers that are interested in bringing back some old bills that could create some funding at the state level for ongoing maintenance and operations costs. So we'll be going back to them later this fall, having continued conversations to see if there's something in 2024 that could get accomplished. Where we've already had some success is existing programs at the federal level. You can see these up here, but let's start with the IRA, which we currently don't qualify for. We're working with policymakers to see if we can expand the production tax credit to qualify. It'd be a 30% savings. It'd be a really nice help for our customers. The Department of Energy loan program, we've already applied for 9 different projects where we think we can save our customers about $113 million over the course of 30 years. It's a great program. It'd be good savings for customers. And then the IIJA program, 20 different projects, about $40 million in savings for customers. So a great opportunity there. We've applied for that. We have been told that they are oversubscribed. That means more funding has been asked for than is actually part of the program. So we'll see where we stack up against everybody else who's applied for this funding as well. But we feel really good about our projects and think that they'll qualify. So we'll find out on one of them later this year. We'll find out on the next one, Q1 of next year. So just want to talk about some of the other things that we've talked about. RFP. I want to just be very clear what that is. It's a request for proposals. I saw somebody brought it up to me before that on our sheet we don't actually call out what an RFP is. So we have done a request for proposals, or we're going to do a request for proposal to understand, is there genuine interest from a responsible buyer that would be interested in buying our assets? What we heard from the communities is we want to keep our empowerments. That's what we heard pretty clearly from the majority of people. Selling the asset is a way we can do that. That is one aspect that we could look at, take the burden off of our customers and maintain the empowerments of the communities. There's a lot of things that we need to happen to make this a reality. First of all, we're just going to see if there is genuine interest. As Maggie said, we've been told, we've had a lot of people reach out to us that there is an interest in buying our assets, but we have to put it to paper, do an RFP to understand is it genuine and are they responsible buyers who can actually have the capacity and financial wherewithal to maintain these facilities and keep them safe for your community. From a timeline perspective, we're going to release later this year. We expect that we'll receive proposals in Q1 of 2024, and then we'll spend the rest of 2024 reviewing those proposals, and if it gets to the point where we're actually negotiate. But one thing you can count on, there will be a public process with this, and there will be a public input from your local leaders and things like that to make sure that a buyer makes sense for this community. We talked about triple bottom line a lot last year, and I just kind of want to put this in perspective of some of the things that we still have to do from an ongoing standpoint, working as we consider the triple bottom line. I'll actually start with people because we already talked about one thing we heard very clearly was that the majority of communities want to keep their empowerments. And so we are at a point today where we're committed to doing that with you. If the community desires that, we're here today to say that when we get to that point, we are going to be at the table with you to try to figure out a way to keep your empowerment, even if we have to exit the business. And I think one of the things I want to make very clear when we talk about here in prosperity, the next decision point that Consumers Energy has to make is, are we going to relicense our facilities, or are we going to exit the business of hydro? And that's a really important distinction for us that I want you all to understand, because I think last year the conversation around decommissioning really is where the focus went. Our next decision is not to relicense or decommission. Our next decision is to relicense or to exit. And if we exit, there are options. Okay? There are options as far as the RFP and selling the asset. That still is us exiting the business. We can look at alternative structures for communities to consider, and we're willing to do that. The one thing I just want to make clear, we won't be able to do that alone. We will need partners in the communities that will own the assets in the future. We'll be able to maintain them in the future, and that'll be an important part of that process. So if there is willing participants at the local level, we certainly can find a way to make that happen. And then from a planet standpoint, it's really important to understand that there are environmental impacts to our facilities. And we will continue to work with DNR, with EGLE, with other regulators that we have to make sure that we're understanding the impacts to the environment and we are staying compliant with the requests and needs of our regulators. The other thing that we realized last year is, I think when we came in and had these conversations, that immediately people got scared and thought that they're going to wake up in a week and you're going to see construction equipment outside your dam and the potential to remove your facility. But what I want to make clear here is any choice we make is going to be a very long process. There's not anything that's going to happen in the immediate future that you have to be concerned that your life is going to change immediately. So I just want to talk through some of this stuff. Relicensing. We educated everybody last year that it's about a 5.5-year process. So for our communities that have a license date at 2034, 2028 is a big year for us. That's a year that we need to know by then. If we're going to relicense these facilities, we got to start that process in 2028. From a decommissioning standpoint, we guess that it's going to take us 10 to 12 years. So even if I was coming here today to say that that was a decision that we had made, and like I just said, that's not going to be the decision point. We say the next time you hear from me about a decision would be either we're going to relicense our facilities or we're going to exit, and then we'll have a lengthy process about what does the decision after that look like? Is it a decommissioning, or is it a structure? Is there another option that we can consider on the table to maintain the impoundment? But anyway, that's going to be like 10 to 12 years. So again, even that decision would not take place overnight. And then divestment is also not quick. We think of selling other assets in our life. We can do that very quickly. Any type of divestment in our world is going to take years. So to sell this asset is not something that's going to happen overnight. We estimate probably a 2 to 6 year process for us to actually go through that process, find a reasonable buyer, deal with our regulators, and get all the approvals that will be needed to execute a sale like that. So I'll end with this. Kind of our plans, as Maggie alluded to, what we're trying to do moving forward is to get away from once a year coming to see you, having a public meeting like this. We'd like to be here more often, but we also not necessarily think that it's right for Consumers Energy to be the ones leading this effort. So we're working with all of our different communities to find a local organization that can take the lead, who can represent all stakeholders, who can bring the appropriate people to the table to try to help educate us on, no matter what our decisions, if we relicense or if we exit, what does the community want? What does the community need? If we relicense, I'm sure you don't want just to be status quo. I'm sure you want new opportunities, you want new recreation. Some of the more environmentally concerned folks are going to want us to do some other things in relation to your pond. So those are the things that we want to try to flush out early on in the process. What's important in the community? And likewise, if we exit, what are the things that are really important to this community? Are you in that group of people who really want to maintain your impoundment? Is that what's most important? Is we don't care whether or not you generate hydropower, but we want our pond to remain as is. That's great feedback for us, and we understand what we're dealing with, and then we can be a partner at the table trying to figure out how to make that happen. But so we don't have that partner locally. We also don't know if it'll be Alcona only, or if it'll be do something ensemble-wide. We'll leave that to the community and the community leaders and the organizations that we select to lead this to say, is it better to have something hyper-local only on this community, or do you want to do something more along the entire ensemble and look at the entire river system as a prosperity group? Anything else you would cover on that, Maggie? Or?
No, you did great. Okay, thanks Josh, thanks everyone. So we are through our talking at you. Now we really want to be able to answer your questions to the best of our ability. So I'm going to hand my microphone over to Joy. And if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll start working our way through the crowd to answer as many questions as we can. I'm going to start here. I'm handing over the microphone and making a hard choice here at the beginning.
Real quick, just before we start, I just want to introduce Mary Ann Walter again. She's a principal engineer for our company. So one of the technical questions around our hydros are going to go to her. You don't want me answering the questions.
Very good.
So,
I'm Marvin Walther for WKJC, and thanks to Rich for staying in touch with us about all this, because last year we didn't know about these meetings. So, principally what I see as a fundamental issue here, it's not so much the economics as what, I'm a transplant, so I'm looking at this from the outside in, because I'm not from here. When I first moved here, I learned that this dam system on this river was initially a flood control project. Without these dams, Alcona, half of it couldn't exist. The evidence for the ancient channels that empty into Lake Huron are evidence of that. So if, as I see it, removal of the dams are not an option. So my question would be, do you have the option to let the Corps of Engineers take over? And maybe that's a way out? Because these are going to have to be rebuilt. And if you guys are looking for an exit plan, then you're going to need some investor to come in and rebuild these dams.
Hello, can you hear me? I get told I do this too much, so I'm sorry. All right. Army Corps of Engineers, so we built all of these structures, they're not designed as flood structures. They're not designed as flood structures, they're designed as, they're not designed as flood structures. Okay, so I'm just gonna be real clear on that, they're not designed for that. On the other hand, the Army Corps of Engineers is someone we could talk to, but more than likely, because they're not flood structures, it's probably not something that we would want to be interested in. But we're not saying that they can't, right?
But what about Alcona? I mean, it's obvious that the river channels were wide at one time, and there are several diversions
Okay,
that
so
happened in history.
the question, make sure I have this right, is that Alcona could potentially have some issues because of the old river channels. Do I have that summarized well?
Yes.
Okay. So anything that we would do as we come through, if we were to decommission, we would look at all of that. We have not today, because that's not a decision that we've been made, but it would be something that would have to be looked at in detail before anything happened.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm going to move over here so we're not getting that feedback, sorry. And stand right in front of the light here for us for the next 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, we'll turn this way. Let's have a left hand there. Okay, so I think by now most of you, how many of you are aware of the Goshen battery plant, electric vehicle battery plant, China-owned battery plant that's $650 million of our Michigan taxpayer money is going to be built in Big Rapids? Can you raise your hand? So a lot of people are aware of it. So we do know that battery production requires substantial amount of brine water and fresh water. So my question to you is, will America's greatest enemy, China, be considered as a potential buyer like the Goshen battery plant?
Yeah, we haven't put any geographic limitations to it. So just if we haven't, that hasn't been part of our decision making. So is a foreign buyer potential? Sure, it's potential. They would have to.
Not a foreign buyer, the Chinese company is part of
We have,
the entity.
we haven't limited anybody.
Okay, so you can't answer that really?
We have not limited anybody.
So that's a yes, they could have.
Could they put in a proposal? Yes, they could.
Other questions for us? Yep, Joy's coming. Joy's gonna go back there and then we'll come down that middle row there to you three.
When you did the survey, who did the questionnaire go to?
Yeah, great question. The questionnaire, and Joy, you can hear back the microphone, otherwise I think your arm's gonna get stretched out today. The survey went to any property owner identified in the 2021 tax rolls as having property adjacent to consumers' property. So it was a very small group, especially in this community, right? Where there's not a lot of property owners that are adjacent to the dam impoundment. Within 100 feet, yeah.
In that case, did you also survey the businesses that utilize the area?
Yeah, it was specific to property owners, so not necessarily unless they were right there on
To the
the,
best of my, okay. So basically what you're telling me is that both of the canoe operations that use the Alcona area were not included in your survey.
correct, it was not a survey of businesses, right? It was a survey of property owners. That was who we were targeting in that survey, was property owners. It wasn't meant to be an all-inclusive survey, and so the data is just to speak to property owners. But we know that that's an important voice that would need to be involved in these community conversations going forward. Appreciate that.
Four points. Number one, there are many threats to the economic security of Alcona County, Osceola, and Alpena counties, and Iosco. But the greatest threat to the security, economic security of these people is the dam. You remove the dam and you destroy the foundation economic base of this community. Point number one. Point number two, that we are customers of consumers' energy. We receive and pay for the electricity we produce. At the same time, We are the recipients of your investment and development. You destroy your investment and development in this community, and we're left with just the cost of the electricity. Point number 3, you evaluated the value of this community, its contribution to this community over 1 year. The dam has been here for 100 years. If you took the value of that community, of that product, over 100 years, your numbers would be minuscule. Well, I think that's good enough for me.
No, those are all incredibly valid and good points, right? That contribution study is designed to help people understand the contribution of last year, right? That was the data we looked at, 2022. But, sir, your point is spot on, right? That these assets have been here a long time and contributing to the economy for quite some time. And the data, there's no denying, right? That data showed you guys that millions of dollars annually, it's the backbone of this economy. I would agree with everything you said, sir.
I've got a couple of them. One is, why are the licenses so expensive? What's involved in getting a license? And
Can I take that one first?
Oh, sure.
Can I take that one first, actually?
Okay.
Okay, so that number is today through the next license period. So it's not the license to apply. It is through what we would spend through the whole license period, which can be anywhere from 30 to 50 years long.
And the number we used was actually, just for clarity, the number we used was 50 years. So we assume that if we go to a
So
license,
that applies to 50 years worth.
that we would go for 50 years. And the other key thing that I just want to make sure everybody understands, Maggie said it, but I just want to make sure we're all clear. That is today's dollar. And why we use that number is if we go to the state or if we go to the federal government and say, we need a grant, because we're not going to put this all on customers' backs. We need some sort of dollar coming in. That would then be what we would need today. If you look at that over the course of time, and you look over the next 60 years, that gap in relicensing versus decommissioning is actually about $10.2 billion. So if you take that over the course of the 60 years, the gap is significantly larger if you try to do math.
And another question I was wondering, with this infrastructure bill that we're trying to get our bridges and all this kind of stuff taken care of, does this apply for any of that? Is that a potential?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's what some of those dollars that Josh showed you up there where we were applying for federal dollars, those are part of that infrastructure package in some cases, in other cases with other programs.
And that's the federal level. From the state level, most of the funding goes to removal. So there's money that are there for communities who need to remove dams. There's not a lot of money there for dam safety projects or efficiency projects. I'm sorry.
No repairs?
They're pushing solar.
Hi, my name is Bill. On a micro level, you guys have no respect for your people that pays the bills. I've been paying for 53 years. I had on you guys 7 weeks of a question to know what kind of power I had coming into my business, and you couldn't give me an answer. And it took an engineer a week and a half to give me a phone call, and he did leave a message. I got 30 phone calls to you guys, and so you guys think you're all in a a box of chocolates. I call you communist energy because you're not respecting us. You do what you want. You send out these blue trucks. They had $250,000 a piece or more. People sat in those trucks day after day, and they serve them behind buildings and things like that, and it's not of the nature of a break or something in that. And they let the trucks run and burn up fuel and things without even consideration at all to us. I drive by and I tell you, get to work. And what do? Next day you're still there, and I tell you, get to work. You guys have no respect for me and the people of your nature. I got a phone call from, I was supposed to talk to a manager, and I got a phone call from Becky at, her phone number is 517-525-6585. She said she could not help me at all with my scenario, with the engineers not getting back with me. It's totally uncalled for. And this is the first time I ever asked for a consumer power for anything, and you guys shoved it right in my face. And it stinks. It stinks bad. And now I still can't open up my business. And you guys want to help all these small people. I asked you guys for some help for me because I'm losing badly. And you guys said, there ain't nothing you can do for me. Yet you post out that you want to help everybody else that can't afford something. I got 53 years involved with investing in you guys. And you give me no response back. Say, you're too busy for me, you can't help me. And I said that I have a panel that only has 2 ground wires out of it, and a main breaker, and I wanted to know what the phase was, as well as the power coming into it, so I could invest in equipment, and look at it, and you couldn't give it to me for 5 weeks. Totally unheard of. As well as, you guys labeled me as being hostile. And so you guys said that I need to be endured with your guys' tactics of downgrading me. That's not your words are just words. Actions is action. My words are true. You guys falsely accused me of being hostile. And I told them that I would go to the canoe races, and I have a 31 truck, and it is loud as hell. And on my side of my truck, I'm going to put how you guys have treated me. And they said, well, you do whatever you want. And then she said, well, so you're going to hurt people? You accused me again of being hostile. It's not right. You guys have no respect for us.
So I can't speak to your specific instance, but here's a commitment I'll make to you. Rich and I will give you a card tonight.
Oh, I hope so.
And
I went through 6 managers.
I gave you the time. Let me respond to you, okay? We will track it down, and we will try to do what we can to help you. You have us looking at you in the face. We will work with you to do that. To your greater issue. To your greater issue. I hope everybody can understand this. You say we don't respect our customers. The only reason we are here is because we respect our customers. The cost of this is not consumers' energy costs. This doesn't go to our shareholders. This isn't us. Quite frankly, if we put all of our money into this, our shareholders would make lots of money. Okay? That's our business model. But what this does is it costs customers a lot. All of you and customers across the state will pay lots of money to keep these. We're trying to figure out a way to keep these for the community and not put that entire burden on our customers. We do care about you. We do care about our customers very much. And so we just don't want to pass on costs when we know we can get energy cheaper for customers. We don't want to pass it on. I realize that's really hard for people who live around and recreate in those assets. I get that that's really hard to hear. But it hurts me to hear we don't care about our customers, because I promise you we do. And Rich and I will do the very best we can to solve your problem. Okay?
It hasn't happened yet.
You haven't been working with us. We'll try.
We have
Okay, Joy, yep, next one, thank you, sir.
Yep, I'll go over here, and then we have a couple more.
I see the yellow shirt, I see you, and I'll make sure we get to you. I know you have your hand raised sometime.
My name is Vicki Good, and my question is a little bit more in the distant future. It's about the campgrounds and the pond. Have you got any data on what the river would look like if they took out the dams? How wide it would be, and versus how it is now, how deep it would be. I understand that if you take the dams out, you're not going to be able to extend the park into the riverbed, because that now becomes a floodplain. But I'm curious on how, what the river would look like once they decommissioned and removed dams.
A valid concern and question to have. We have not started doing those studies yet, but that is part of what's next, right? As I talked about what these economic impact studies will be, that's something we'll look at, and we'll look at bottomlands and other things like that. It's also something that we would expect the groups that Josh talked about, these community prosperity groups, would be actively involved in being a partner and thinking about with consumers. Some of the bottomlands could be redeveloped, and then you're right, some of them would need to be used as floodplains and other things like that. But that's the next step in this process. Great question, though. If the lady in the yellow right there has, oh, yep, and then the lady in yellow, great.
First of all, thank you for coming out here and listening to what we have to say and for the information that you're sharing. I'm a little confused. The last part that you shared with us was about if the community desires that it would be consumers' choice to keep at least the structures there. It seems to me that the majority of the people want them to stay. So there's two things. One, I understood again towards the end that you were going to create this community partners thing to determine what the people have to say, and yet earlier there were graphs that showed input that you'd already had for the different dams, and I was shocked when I saw many of them, including Alcona, where the majority of the people wanted them shut down. So why am I confused here?
Yeah, so the slide that you saw was just about website comments. So that was one medium. So that could be anybody. One medium in which we received the information. So that's where that grouping is coming from. And I just want to be clear, right? So just so everybody in this room is aware, there are people in this room who want to see these dams removed. Not just sitting on a website somewhere. There are people in this room who want to see these things removed. They're not going to stand up in this room and say it, because you all can understand that. I see faces in the room that, quite frankly, I've had conversations with. I just know that. So I hope everybody can just be open to the thought that there are other viewpoints. There are people who want to see dams removed. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying people who want them to stay are right. That's just not our position to stay. I just hope everybody can understand that there are different viewpoints in this, and it's not just people across the state. There are people in this room who feel differently than you do.
When you get together a community group that's interested in maintaining or keeping the dam in place, do you have resources that the community people can look to for grants to maintain or update a dam?
So not now. I do think consumers could be a financial partner in whatever the final solution looks like, but that would all have to be figured out long term. There's got to be a long-term owner, because if it's not generating hydropower, MPSC is not going to allow us to own it. So we have to find an owner for it, and then we would need to find some sort of long-term funding to own or to maintain it. I also don't think that we would just leave our asset. I don't want you to kind of picture it that way. I think we would have to work together to determine an alternative structure that the community would be invested in. So I don't see a scenario in which we would just leave ours to another group to operate. Yeah, unless it was sold as part of the transaction.
Hello. You operated the dam for 75 years, raising and lowering the water. Why haven't you contacted the EPA about going back to that if it was more profitable? I mean, the fish were fine back then, and you make more money, and it would be a big crisis now.
Yeah, great question. And we hear that at every meeting, right? Why not go back to that way? It was pretty, since the 1994 license, many of these facilities, they have lost the ability to do run of the river. And while the fish might have seemed okay, right, study after study shows that's pretty detrimental to the river health to really raise and lower it like that. And so, I mean, people ask us every single meeting, would consumers be willing to go to EPA to roll back environmental regulations? And the answer is probably no. Just not where environmental regulations and dam owners are headed.
Have you tried? Have you petitioned them?
No, because we are governed by our FERC license, and so our FERC license requires us to meet certain water quality standards, which are based on the Water Quality Acts from the 70s, the improvements. So our last license, we have to follow that. What we could do is in the next relicensing process ask that, but usually what happens is we get the pushback the opposite way, right? So The next license is going to open, and more than likely, there's going to be petitions for additional water quality standards from where we are today in our current license. So to stay where we are today would be great. To go backwards would be very challenging. Not impossible, but very, very challenging.
But great question, something we hear in every single meeting. I don't know where Jenny is. Oh.
Hi, the way I understand your slides, you took a survey of people that were adjacent from the dams, correct?
Yep, that was
So you also explained that 19 of the properties were owned by Consumers Energy across from the dams. I am a third of a mile off of the dam. I'm down here in Cook, so I apologize. But I still get taxed for water property. My taxes still pay for water view. I have no way to access it except to go down, and I can't even put a boat on it because y'all took all the docks out. So, and we were never contacted about that. Why was not the community at large asked to go into this survey instead of just a select few?
So the survey, the community has been invited to participate in our community engagement work. You'll see those responses in the full group. The survey was directed at people who live within 100 feet of the impoundment, directly to try to get, because we can, if you say you're impacted, we can keep going back and back and back to people who truly feel that way. We wanted to get the voice of people who live directly on the impoundment, so we chose 100 feet. You know.
So you had one person at Cook Dam. One building at Cook Dam that you took a survey from, when there is a whole community, maybe two people. It just seems like it was very skewed, and that we weren't even notified of these meetings last year. I was never notified. And this impacts my property as much as my family's future up here as a second home. And so now here I am, I'm looking at my property values going, should I sell? Because my kids are not going to want to come up here if there's no dam in the next 11 years.
Yeah, I'm sorry we weren't notified. We tried, we learned, we got better. We did it more places, we promoted it more places this year. I'm glad you heard about it this year. I apologize that we didn't get the message out enough last year. We heard about it, we heard from people, so we learned from it.
My name is Barbara Carpenter, and my parents bought up here in 1936. So the Cook Basin was brand new at that time. I can remember back in the 1940s coming up here and being on the north side of the river. All of the electricity was available on the south side of the river, but there was nothing on the north side of the river. We lived in this cottage, used it as a second home until 1960, when my dad then put indoor bathroom in and run a pump by gasoline to give us running water into the house. We still didn't have electric lights. So I've seen the river as it is. I've seen the river over the 8-year period that I've been able to come up here. I bought the place in 1984 from my mother. And my son, who is here with me tonight, just recently built a home down the road. I am on the river within the 100 feet. I did receive a questionnaire. But he had his home, a quarter of a mile on the road. He is off the river, but he does have a dock on the river. We lease that property for the docks. I can't imagine after 87 years of coming up here and recognizing what it is now to what it was in 1935 when they built the dam. I would like to see, a year ago, the meeting in Oscoda, they showed a map, which was so small you couldn't read it with a magnifying glass. I would like to see that map reconstructed in a little bit more detail to what the river was back in 1930 to what it is now, and how much different it would be and how much recreational value we would lose from the impoundments. Cook Basin is probably the largest impoundment, has the most recreational value. There are other campgrounds that, yes, they have them. The sand hill at the monument is a large creation of value and recreational value to the people in the area and downstate. I mean, thousands of people come to the sand hill at the monument for the weekend. It's impossible to find a boat slot anywhere near it on the holiday weekends. It would be a complete devastation to the area in that respect.
It was Barbara, right? Barbara, thank you, Barbara. How many of you in the room have a story similar to Barbara's, right? That you're second or third or even fourth generation property owners here in this community? Yeah, right? I mean, that you all can really resonate, and I hear you. I think that's why we're here and why we're continuing to have these conversations about how to engage the community and keep your ponds. Because Barbara, you're one of 1,000 stories, right, that we've heard that's very similar to that, and it's personal. I get it, I hear that. So thank you for sharing that, Barbara.
I have a question for you.
Oh, hang on, we'll get back to you.
What are consumers going to do with the property if they were to restore the river back to its natural state?
Yeah, okay, I'm actually going to let, sir, what's your name?
My name's Eric.
I'm going to let Eric yell his question, because it's a good question and one that we hear quite often, right? What would happen to all of the, but not everybody start yelling at questions at me. Don't let Eric cause you all to behave badly. What would consumers do with all the bottom land, right? Like, you know how big your impoundments and your ponds are today. What would happen if the river were to go back to its natural river stream? What would consumers do with all that property? Something that they would need to consider. They don't have an answer for that today.
Like a solar farm?
He said like a solar farm. Eric, you're really misbehaving over here, just yelling questions at me.
All the power's right there, so all you
Yeah.
have to do is right connect
So
to it and make a solar
like
farm.
a solar farm, right? It would be part, if consumers did decide to decommission and remove the dam, it would be part of what they had the conversation with the community about, what the community would want that property to look like, and they would be part of that discussion going forward.
Why would it be our decision? It's your property.
A commitment to the community, right? They've been here 100 years and they don't want to just walk away and not have the community be part of their future. Great question. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, go ahead.
The answer of Mrs. Good, when you mentioned about what it's going to look like when the water's gone or all this, back about 30 years ago, between Five Channel and Cook Dam, Sidtown, they drained the water out, and it was a big mud hole. And all it was about 20 feet wide. And the garbage you seen in there, it was a mess. So when they take the dams out, it's going to be a big mud hole.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe Joy can just go right down this line here to you, and then you, sir. You guys are being so kind to Joy. Thank you. She's getting her steps in tonight.
Hi, my name is Kevin. I have a quick question. I didn't get the questionnaire last year either. I don't know why, but I didn't. The question is, if consumer power leaves, if there's no dam there at all, where do we get our electricity from?
So your electricity now doesn't necessarily come from the dam, right? Electricity gets put on the grid, it goes to the nearest use. There's no concern from our company, because it only generates 1%, there's no concern from a reliability standpoint of where communities across the state would get their electricity. That's not a concern of ours, but it's a part of our IRP, our 5-year plan that we filed with the MPSC. I encourage all of you to take a look at that and kind of what our plan is going forward. Right now, hydro is still part of our plan. But if we were to lose that, that's not a concern. The company has no be able to deliver you energy.
This question is given to Consumers Energy. Why would any local community support the sale of the dam or its license, but it could not guarantee the future of the dam? By reference of their own flyer, it is true we would not have a say in the future of the reservoir if a license is transferred.
So our intent is to find a buyer who would buy all 13, and their desire would be to leave to keep the impoundments, right? That's our goal. The only reason we're really considering this is for the benefit of the community. So that as we go through this process, that is our intent, is to find a buyer who has a desire to keep your impoundments, continue to operate them as a hydro facility. So that's well, once it sells, can we control it? No, but that's the options that we're looking at to try to find a way to keep your impoundment. We can. We absolutely can. People are going to put in a proposal. We will view all those proposals. We'll absolutely, the company will absolutely have a say in providing.
Thank you. My name is Matt Derry. I have property downstate, and I've got a place up here. We've been coming for 45 years, the last 20. And thanks to the actual supply of power, thank you for that too, because it's been fairly consistent in our case. We have had decades of fundraising activities up here for the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation on these backwaters, and have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there are things in the storybook that don't often get conveyed. I want you to know that there are things outside of the direct community that occur. And there are truly 500,000 people that come through here. I think we're all aware of that. A couple of questions that I have. So I missed last year's meeting, wasn't aware of it. Doesn't matter, what matters is the here and now. What I have gathered from what I've read is that Consumers Power is committed to go to the government, meaning the state, with whatever the recommendations are going to be. There are 4 possible solutions that I read about. One of them, and the 4th one in the list that I saw, was maintaining some semblance of the impoundments and backwaters and all that kind of thing. Given the data that we've seen up here and widespread majority support for keeping these dams in place, is it consumers' intent to go to the state and say, this is what the citizens want?
Yes, we've done that, quite frankly. They've seen the data. The state, I don't want to say the state, your state officials who represent your area and all of our dam community areas have seen the data. They are aware that the communities have told us. So everything you see here today is a snapshot, and if you dig into the reports, when they get posted online, the full reports, I'm talking hundreds of pages of reports, you'll be able to go through it and see it, and your state policymakers have seen that. So we have had conversations with what we're hearing in the communities is, yes, your communities, for the overwhelming majority, want to keep these in power.
Okay. Is that in fact going to be the recommendation for consumers? That's my question.
Help me understand what you mean by recommendation.
Well,
I want to answer correctly.
Okay, so you're, right now is the role you're playing, and thank you for doing this. The role you're playing is an intermediary, if you will, with where the ultimate decision is going to get made, where the approvals will be gained for whatever path this is going to go down. And that's going to come from a government agency. That's not going to come solely from consumers. You are going to make a recommendation. Is that recommendation to try to sustain this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is but we have to find dollars, sir, because we can't put that whole cost on the customers. So if we can find dollars, yeah, that's what we are actively trying to do now.
The funding of this is a whole other discussion. The engineering of the solutions is a whole other discussion. But if the recommendation is reflective of the community, what the community wants, that's what I'm looking for, is that your commitment is to represent the community with the governmental agencies that are regulating this.
Correct.
Fair enough? Okay. Have there been any discussions in the event, and maybe this is premature,
Have there been any discussions between either Consumers Powers or the state of Michigan with any developers? Because for years and years, we've known this was under lease. Locals here all know that there was going to come a day. Has there been any conversation with developers between the state or Consumers Powers as far as real estate development on these waterways?
There's not. The only thing I would say is that likely some of the folks who have reached out as interested parties may be developers, so I want to be clear about that. But as far as us and future use, what we're looking to do, no. But we've actually heard that from some communities, not all. Some have said, you own all this property, why don't you put some houses or do this kind of development? Quite frankly, we came into this thinking that's not at all what people want to see. They want to see the natural beauty that already exists there. But what's great about these prosperity groups is we can learn from the local community. If there is a desire for us to truly look at that, would you like us to go find a developer to look at this land? If that's an option, at least it's something we can take back to our community, our company, and say, yeah, the community would actually like to see this develop a little bit more, see some more tax revenue brought in based on housing or business, whatever it might be. It certainly is something we could take back. But that's why it's so important to get more voices involved in this process.
Okay, great. So at this point, the answer really is no. There's no active discussions.
No.
Lastly, I know the issue was brought up earlier about a potential sale, whether it's all of them, some of them, partials here, partials there. Who might the buyers be? And you are developing an RFP process for qualified bidders. Who is going to write the RFP specifically, and what laws are going to be followed? Because the concern in this room that I've already heard one person voice is we have a real problem with communist entities. We have a problem with foreign nations coming in here onto our lands and regulating or owning anything. So, who's writing the RFP, and how do we accommodate, again, the community's concerns in not allowing foreigners to take what we own as the people?
So we actually just signed an advisor who's going to help write that RFP for us. And they're a Michigan-based company, right? So they're going to help us craft that language so that we can get the interested buyers that will meet the requirements of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that they're financially secure and that they have operational experience and dam safety experience, that they can run the facilities and operate under the current license. So we have a local company that's helping us write that RFP, and we're using their guidance and for the legal aspect side as well. So we're making sure that we're doing it the right way, and that's what's taking us time.
Yeah, I see there's a question back there, and then I just want to make sure that we get to everybody who hasn't asked a question yet. So, ma'am, I see your hands raised, and if we have time, I'll come back to you. But others that haven't asked a question after this gentleman? Okay, Joy, I think one here, and then did you have your hand raised too, ma'am? Okay, so we'll come over to these two, and then ma'am, if we still have time, we'll come back to you. Is that okay? Great, thanks. Right here, right there.
Hi, I'm Karen from Mankato. Two things. We need Elon Musk here. We really need, where has consumers been spending their money on better technology? I cannot believe that the dams could not be more efficient. That's a lot of power going through there every day. And I think we're using very outdated technology. And I would certainly rather see our beautiful river stay the way it is, and the impoundments, than farm fields covered with solar panels. And I know for a fact, and I'm sure some of you do too, that a lot of our farm fields are presently being leased long-term for solar panels. The other thing is the money. $3.60 a month. It wouldn't bother me a bit. I mean, my gosh. Our bills are going up way higher and everything else. And consumers just stopped allowing you to use your credit cards. So they've got a big price increase right there. So what are they doing with that money? That's it.
Well done.
We have one right here, right here.
My name is Sherry Klaus, and I lived here for over 60 years. My husband's family's been here since 1904. These dams have been here for so long, you allowed people who know really nothing about this area to go on and vote, or whatever you want to call it, to close the dams. But yet you didn't let the people that are so many feet away from there vote for any of that. Why is my opinion not worthy, but yet theirs are, when they have no idea what it is to live up north, what it is to ride that river, what it is to fish that river, what it is to go swimming in that river. This gentleman's, done wonderful things using that river, our canoe races. I don't understand where you would do that and not give all of us a right to have an opinion on this, and you didn't.
Yeah.
And just a second. My husband's been in business for 50 years here, and we have paid you all this money. Where have you done with all that money? I'm sure you've improved other things all around Michigan. Well, what about right here, up north, that is always cut off? I think so many times when companies get big, they forget where they come from. And you came from a small town that you were happy to take our money, do what you needed to do. But now it's our turn to have something back. And I think it's time that you give back to these dams, these people up north, what the city people have been getting forever. We're just as important. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know about you, but how many of you have came from the city and came up here and lived? Because this is where you want to be. You don't want to be in the city. You're there because you can't make a living up here. I understand that. But there are people that can. And I think you need to listen to the people and put the money where it is, where they have given you money all these years and not asked for anything from you.
Thank you, ma'am. I completely appreciate that sentiment and that feeling. We hear it across communities. I just want to address something about the survey because I've heard that expressed here, and it's the first time that this has been raised, so I appreciate you guys raising it. I think maybe the communities we've been in thus far, I just had a lot more people who took the survey just because they have more parcels around it. I don't want you to feel like the website feedback or the survey feedback is what's driving any of these decisions, right? It's these meetings. Right? Those are data points for us, but sitting in these meetings and hearing this feedback is why we did the economic contribution studies, why we're continuing to think about these prosperity regions. So I just don't want you to think because you didn't get a survey, somehow your voice isn't being heard. We are hearing it loud and clear in these meetings, and those are just one data point that we're sharing, but I appreciate that, and I just don't want anybody to feel like those somehow have more weight than people who are willing to drive to a meeting and stand up and express themselves. We hear you, and all of that data is weighing just as much, if not more, on how any decision will get made in the future. So thank you. And thanks for pointing that out, because I think I need to think about how I talk about this differently in communities where there just wasn't a lot of property owners.
And the only thing I would add is your feedback is what got us here today. Like our commitment to work with communities to maintain their boundaries is quite frankly what we heard. So I just hope that's clear. We heard from you. We heard very clearly that the majority of people want to keep their communities. The majority of your local leaders, actually all local leaders, want to keep their empowerments. So I want to be very clear. We heard you, and it has driven our decision making. That's exactly what we wanted to do in that process last year. It has helped us. It has informed us. It has made us better and stronger because we got the feedback from all of you.
Troy, there's a gentleman over here in the back corner that we heard from, and then we'll come back over here.
Thank you. My name is Jim, and I only been coming up here for about 40 years. So my question is, first, I respect that you guys are taking the heat. Okay, I mean that. I've been in that in other ways. All right. With that said, I know, and you all know, that there are people that want to have all the dams removed. Okay. Can you explain to this crowd what is the value added to us of getting rid of all these dams? Because that's ultimately one of the paths that may very well take place. What is the value added to us? Because I don't want them gone myself, so I just say.
I'll just be honest. There may be people who have those opinions in this room that would want to tell you what the value is. From our standpoint, I don't know that I see a value that I can give you that this community would benefit from them being removed. I don't want to pull the wool over people. I can't sit here today and say this is the value your community would receive if we took this asset out. So I don't believe that to be true. There may be environmental reasons that people would argue that it would benefit and improve your river system, but as far as community value, what you just saw on the screen, I don't see a benefit for the community.
I just didn't want to say that in case that wasn't right, but I agree. Yeah, exactly what Josh said. I didn't want to get myself in trouble with one question out in the end. So we have time for one last question, ma'am. You can hear my last question tonight.
As far as your survey, I think you should have gone further out than 100 feet. That's nothing. I just heard from the people here, there's many of them that will be affected downstate, whatever. I think your distance was inadequate. Second question I have, and it was on my mind coming up here, in the event that this does come down and these dams do come out, okay, what are you going to do with all that rubble? Where are you going to bury it at?
Okay, great. That would be part. Appreciate that and feedback. That's incredibly helpful if we go out and do another survey. That I hear you loud and clear, especially in this community, miles right out from it really makes sense, or maybe it's the whole community. If we do another survey, so I hear you loud and clear on that. The decommissioning process would help dictate where all of that material and construction debris would go, right? There's landfills that could take that. It could stay on site, that's for sure. It would need to get hauled somewhere, and that's why you see those numbers of like $600 million to decommission, because it turns out there's not a lot of construction debris landfills sitting next to these pretty pristine areas in the state, right? So they'd have to get hauled somewhere. And if it's contaminated sediment or other things, that would need to be handled as well. So all things that, should they choose that path, they would have to figure out, and why that process takes so long and why it costs so much money. Okay, it's 7:30, and so I'm going to honor that we said that we get you out of here on time tonight. If you do have questions that we did answer, Josh, Marianne, Rich will all be here to stay around as long as we need to answer your questions. But I just really want to express my appreciation to all of you for being here, staying with us, and the feedback that you gave us will help make this process go smoother for other communities and help inform how we work with the community into the future. I'm going to hand it off to Josh for the last words, and then we'll send you on your way.
All right. Again, I want to echo what Maggie just said. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. We appreciate the investment in time and interest. It's not lost on us. It's not easy to come out and have these conversations, so we appreciate it. I want to thank the golf course again for hosting us. It's been a great hospitality for us. I really appreciate them. As Maggie said, if you have questions, we'll stick around as late as you need us to. If questions didn't get answered tonight, please come up and talk to us, and we'll address any questions that you have. I want to thank Maggie and her team, Anna and Joy from PSC. They've been doing great work for us, as you see. I encourage all of you to go to the website, get all the information that's there. You can dive into the details. A lot of really good information that's been done over the past year. So really appreciate the time again tonight, and look forward to coming back and seeing you all in your community again. Thank you so much, and be safe.